fall. It's such a nice time of year. It starts to get a little cool, and so out come the hot beverages. And so what is better than making a carrying cozy for your mug? If you have teachers and you need to do gifts, they already have mugs, but what they don't have is a nice cozy carrier for it. This one here, we have a nice little handle and lid, a little flap here to keep the beverage warm, and I put a little zipper in it to make it easy to get to your mug. I also made the little mug rug for it that sits here in the bottom. It gives it a little bit of extra, and so it's ready to go. So I'm going to show you how you can use the little Rebel to quilt this with push quilting and assemble the whole thing, including putting in the zipper. I have pre-cut my lining fabric. I'm going to put that down first. And because I have multiple layers here, I decided to do spray basting for the basting step, all right? So this is the part that is going to face the cup. So to give it some more ability to retain that heat a little bit longer, I am using this shiny batting. So I have this side and I have this side. And the side that is shinier is the side that you want facing the cup. So I'm going to want that to face my backing. And then I'm going to take a piece of cotton batting. The reason you want to use cotton is, one, it is going to give you a little bit more of that insulation. You definitely cannot put this in the microwave even though I'm using cotton, because this has metal in it, okay, so because it reflects the heat back. And so I'm going to make sure that that is face down, and then my top piece is going to go on it. Going to use my spray batting. So a light layer on both the backing and my Insul Bright, and then I'm just going to smooth that down. I did about half of it, and then I'm going to pull that back, and I'm going to spray maybe the next third or so, just lightly. This is a water base, so it will wash out really easy. I don't need to saturate it because it's just a baste. And just like when I pin baste or if I sew baste, something like that. So that's nice and secure. I'm going to do the same thing with my batting. And it, you know, like I said, I pre-cut these. They don't have to be perfect because I have cut these rectangles larger than what my final project's going to be. And if I didn't get the edges very well, I can lift those up and add to that. It just makes it real easy to get all your pieces nice and flat when you have so many layers. All right, so I'm just going to get that lined up and straightened out and continue with the spray basting. And you're going to want to let that sit for a little bit to dry, and then you're ready to put it underneath your machine to start quilting. Now that it's dry, I'm ready to start doing my quilting. So I have the little Rebel set up with my hopping foot, already switched to quilt mode really easily by putting on the metallic thing here that's going to do that. And because this is a little bit larger piece, it's not large enough to put on a frame, but it's, you know, larger than just this throat area, which is already huge. I put on the extension table, so this is just going to help give me some support. Remember, I have basically, in a sense, 2 layers of batting on here. So I am going to want to check that I have my height adjusted properly. So I'm just going to drop my needle. And so I can tell that's going to be a little bit tight. So we're going to loosen that. Slip the hopping foot height gauge in there, and it should just rest when it's in the down position. Make sure it's tight. All right, and so that is going to be good. And so now I just have to decide where I want to start and what it is that I want to do. So when I'm push quilting, really like to start in the middle. And the reason, even though I've got it all basted and all that, is that There's just something about when you're quilting a piece like this and you're kind of shifting it around and you're turning it around and stuff like that, that you could potentially kind of mess up your fabric. So, or as it's kind of, pushing, right? Because you are quilting it. And this is just going to give me the opportunity to continue to smooth out those layers. So that's why I want to start there. And one of the things I want you to know is when you're quilting something like this that you're going to cut up, don't get paranoid about how your quilting looks. You're going to have a few mistakes here and there. I'm going to end up with a few of those things as well. You just need to be careful that you get a general design that you want, that your stitches are good, that your tension is right, that kind of thing. Don't worry about it, because any little mistakes that you have, you're not going to see them once it's all cut up and sewn together. Okay, so unless you really have some issues with tension, just go for it. And with this one, I really want the cups to pop, especially having all of this layering and stuff. So I think what I'm gonna do is a really simple meander through all of my blue spaces here, and I'm gonna outline my cups. I think that's gonna make this one fun. So I'm gonna drop my needle, bring up my bobbin. I also picked a thread that I am gonna be able to see my quilting. I decided to go with our rose pink, and that's because there's a lot of pink both on the back and in the teacups themselves. So I thought it was a good choice for blending all of that, and when I get to the binding, it's gonna look really great with the binding as well. So here we go. I've got it the positions that I want. I am using the sensor mode so that I get good regulation of my stitches. It's going to keep up with me, but I can also, if I'm more comfortable push quilting with the foot and controlling the speed, you can do that as well. So versatile, the little rebel. So let's get started. So as you can see with the built-in stitch regulator, as I slow down, it's just going to kind of jog in place for me, but it's going to keep up as I push quilt around all the different things that I want to quilt. I also love that I can use the foot pedal, so I have a much smaller project in which I can't use, maybe it's not going to cover the stitch regulator. I can still easily quilt and just control with my foot. The other great thing about this machine is the speed. 1,600 stitches per minute. It is easily going to be able to quilt what I need to quilt and keep up with me. In fact, it is always going to be faster than I can ever be. All right, so let me get to a stopping point as I am almost done with this. I'll just go off the edge. All right. So I have finished quilting this. I'm going to just set it to the side. I'm going to cut it down to its final width and height, so 15 by 25 inches. But what I want to show you is once we get back, we're going straight into assembly, some cutting and assembly. So I just want to show you how easy it is to switch this back from quilting to sewing, just as easy to go from sewing to quilting. So I know that I am not going to need this table for the second part, so the first thing I'm going to do is take off this table. But if I did have a large project that I was sewing, I could leave the table on. Just not something that I need for this particular project. It comes off really easy because it's magnetic, goes on really easy because it's magnetic. And there is a handle under here that is going to release my table so I can easily slide it off. And now I just want to change my foot setup. So a little screw here does need to come off completely. And I'm just going to work that around so that it is lined up, and then make sure that I get it really nice and tight. And that's where you can use the screwdriver that comes with the set. I have weak hands. I just can't get like the leverage on it, so I do need a larger one. So if you're like me and your hands are a little on the weak side, or you just have difficulty fiddling with things that are small, just use a larger one, it's fine. But I want it to be nice and torqued so that it won't fall off while I'm doing that. And of course I am going to need to adjust my tension because I'm going from quilting to sewing. So when I'm sewing, I want my bobbin and my thread tension to be a little bit tighter. I'm also going to be sewing a 1/4 inch seam, so I am going to switch to that foot. So the 1/4 inch, or the quilter's one. Plug my foot in and my red bulb will be ready to go. I have this trimmed down to the final width and height that I'm going to need for the longer and shorter pieces. But I basically am going to cut out a 5 by 10 rectangle, and this is going to create the flap and the top for it. I have my different rulers available to do that. So I'm going to start on this side, and I am going to use just a regular size one up to a certain point, because I want this to be really accurate. And I don't want to cut over because that's going to affect my seams. This is when you can't beat a pair of scissors, because you're something with a really sharp point. And so I can just follow my guidelines there. Now do remember that this does have metal in it, so if you have a pair of scissors that you're just really worried about, you might want to use something maybe you use with paper. Now I'm better with a square ruler because I can turn the square ruler any direction, and it's got 4 sides in which I can kind of do that cutting for the top, but I still want to make sure I've got a perfect cut there. So let me just tuck those in my little box of stuff. I have what looks like a lowercase t. This is ready for the next part, but I need to set it aside because I have a couple other things I need to do real quick. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to prepare my inside pocket. My inside pocket is what I can put my tea bag in, and so I'm going to do this opposite of what is going to be my inside. So since this is my inside, I want to see the blue side. So this is going to be my top, and I've got that cut to the size that I want. And because it's a pocket, I want it to be a little firmer, a little stiffer, so I am going to use some medium weight iron-on a stabilizer, and I just can iron it onto whichever side. And I'm also going to need to do the same thing for my handle. So I've cut out the piece for the handle. The difference is I don't have a front or a back. It's going to be the same size. So I have those 2 pieces, and I just need to iron that adhesive on really, really well. Other things that you're going to need is various pieces and thicknesses of binding cut. So these are 2 1/4 inch binding for some of the areas that I'm going to bind where I want a thinner binding, and then I have some 2.5 inch binding cut for some of the larger sizes. Make sure you follow the instructions of your manufacturer for ironing on your stabilizer. Make sure the glue part is towards the wrong side of your fabric, and I usually do this just to get it tacked on a little bit. That feels like it's on there pretty well, so I can move the iron out of the way. And so with this one, what I'm going to do is fold it over like a hot dog, and I am going to sew along just one side like this, and then I'm going to turn it inside out, and I have one due to movie magic. I have one already prepared. I then flipped it back over, turning it right side out, put my seam down the middle, and then I ironed this really, really well, threw this down so it would lay really flat, and that is what's going to become my handle. This one here, very similarly, I'm going to put my right sides together, and I'm going to sew along the side, the top, and the bottom. So I'm going to head to the machine now and do that. So get sides, top, and other side. Okay, so now you just want to trim your corners. It's just going to make it nicer when you turn it right side out. And a little tool is going to help get your corners out straight. I like to give it a press when I'm done. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to give this a nice little press so that it's flat. And I'm going to do just a nice little top stitch here. It'll just make it look nice and finished. And you can do whatever size that you want for a top stitch. I'm just going to stick with a 1/4. Okay, so that's ready to go. I have everything ready to go for the next part. So the next thing that I want to do, because before I can do really any assembly with this, what I need to do is place my pocket. The first 5 inches is going to be the back. And so this is where I'd want the pocket. So I'm just going to put a little marking here because this is what I currently have. But this is, I need to create my seam allowance and finish this edge off. And I'm going to do a 1/4 inch. So I am going to measure from that line that I marked. I'm going to draw another marking. This is where I'm actually going to sew my seam allowance. So I'm going to turn this upside down. When I sew it, I'll have a seam allowance and I will end up with the bottom of my pocket. Okay. And now we're going to fold our pocket back up. And now I'm going to sew along the sides and the bottom and the top. And when I do the bottom, I want to make sure that within that seam allowance, I have the other seam allowance covered so that is nice and finished on the inside. And I like to go just past the pocket when I do that. And because this is double stitch, I'm not worried about going back and forth at the bottom. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to put on the handle. To decide where I want to put the handle, I am going to kind of mock up how this is all going to hold together. So I am just going to use clips and clip this together. So this part here is what is going to make my top. So I want to kind of find the center of where my top's going to be. So I can just kind of mark a general area there. And I'm just going to make sure I've got a flat edge here. And I'm going to take my piece here, measure that 1/4 inch, and give myself just a teeny bit more space. And mark that. And I'm going to do that on both sides. And so when I get done sewing this down, this is going to be where that's going to occur. So that's marked and ready to go. The next part is a little trickier. So we're going to go ahead and worry about getting the zipper on. So I would suggest at least an 8-inch zipper. Now I'm going to end up putting my zipper here, but if I open this up, then I'm going to have a rough edge where this is. So the first thing that I'm going to want to do before I put my zipper on is I'm going to add a little bit of binding. So we're just going to add this to both sides here. All right, so the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little snip here at the 2 corners so that I can fold this nicely. Because like I said, this we're going to get sealed once we get the other part. All right, now I'm going to trim off my excess so that it is flush, because this is going to get covered in a later step. So I have a finished edge now for me to put my zipper on. If I line up the edge of my zipper along where the edge of my binding is, that is going to be the perfect placement for it. I have my stopper part is right there in that corner, and then this is going to be on the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that down. But to do that, I'm going to need my zipper foot. So we're going to do a quick change with that. So I need to kind of think about what side I need to put this on, because I'm going to need to change it. My first set that I want it on this side. So I am going to attach the zipper foot on the left sidebar. So I'm going to sew this part down first, but this is going to give me a nice safe place to do that sewing so that I don't hit the zipper teeth. All right, so we'll go ahead. When I get to the top, I am going to do a little back stitch as well, because again, I want it to be secure. And now we're going to top stitch this on the other side, just to kind of secure it here. Okay, so I have my first part of my zipper secured. Now this is the harder part. I do need to know exactly where my zipper teeth are going to end up. So it does help for me to fold this so I can see where it's going to be, and I'm gonna mark it. And I wanna mark across not just the tape, but that piece of binding that I added. And then I'm gonna unzip. So that's what's going to make it easier for me to sew the other side. And then we're gonna pin, 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 pin. And let's get this side of the tape attached. And then we'll do our top stitching. All right, so this is a good example of where I'm actually going to want to switch this foot, because with this big old bulky part of the zipper, it's going to be hard for me to do what I did on this side. So I am going to switch placements, and that's there. So now I can sew on the other side. So I can fold it up and make sure I've got all my little stringies out of the way, because I don't want to get that caught in the zipper tape. All right, so that's zipping really nicely. Okay. So I just took a little piece of fabric I had left over. I folded the edges on the inside and ironed them, and just made a little tube that is going to go right here. And this little tab here, it's a zipper tab, it's just going to cover the edges of my zipper and give it a nice finished look. And we're just going to sew around this like a box. Just get lined up. And I'm going to start slow, because I do have a lot of thick areas here. I've got a hump to get over with the zipper, so I just need to be patient. So this will be the hardest part, and the rest will then sew on real nicely. Okay, lift and turn. All right, and so we have our little zipper tab on there, and it's nice. We have a nice little finished edge. Now at this point, I would not, if you're like, okay, I've got the zipper, I have the length that I want, I'm gonna cut my zipper, don't do it, because I still have the zipper stops. It's not going anywhere. But if I cut it and I have to kind of open and close my zipper, there is a good chance I'm gonna zip this right off and then have to try to get it back on. So right now, just leave it. It's gonna be fine. We will trim it when we are ready to get to that part. So I need to actually do a little bit of binding before I do final assembly. So this is where I am using the 2 1/4 inch binding that I set aside. So I'm going to bind here. I'm going to add binding here, which is going to create my stop for my zipper. And same thing, I'm going to bind here. So let's start with this one. Now for these sides, I got to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to miter this side the same way as I did over here. But for this side, I need to create a finished edge. And it's going to go over this a little bit. And don't go all the way forward, because you got teeth. You don't want to run over those teeth. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, now I'm ready to flip all those bindings over. So this one's pretty standard, how you would do any typical binding. All right, let's complete our pre-binding before we do our final assembly. We'll stitch in the ditch for all of these. right, so we have all that ready to go. We are going to start doing the final sides and the rest of our binding. All right, so we've got one side sewed up. We can do the 2 parts for the back. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is gonna change depending on what kind of attachment that you want for this. So for this one here, I did an attachment like this. Took a little extra piece of binding I had left over and I just kind of like folded it together and created a little loop. So for this one, I'm gonna do it opposite of this. I just have to decide where I want this to hang from. So if I want it to hang here, then I'm probably gonna want to cut along here. Okay, so I have a couple pieces of binding to deal with. I have this little side edge here that I have to deal with, and then I have the long edge here, which is what my longer piece of binding is for. I am going to need to finish my edge so that it's going to look nice, and we'll do that with a little bit of trimming, folding, and ironing. For something like this, I think it's easier to fold your short edge over. Press it really good. And then recrease your seam, and if you need to, so that it stays nice and flat, let it sit with this for a minute. So at this point, it's pretty much assembled. We're just doing some finishing touches. Oh, we're getting so close to being able to have tea. As you get to this back part here, remember that you've got to push your material over, or you're gonna, if you have it like this, you have to unpick. So just think about that, how you need to push and adjust your material. Okay, so for the flap, you are going to want to fold it down and either pin or clip, because when you come across, you're going to want to sew in here, and then we're going to do some top stitching here on the other side once we finish getting the binding on. And we're going to be careful because, again, we've got a metal piece we need to keep out of the way of our needle. So we have all of our binding on. The next thing that we need to do is put on our handles. We had already marked it, so I've pre-pinned it, just double checked it's where I want before I sew it down. So we are ready to take it under the machine. And then I'm going to sew a small rectangle several times to make sure that it's nice and secure. So that is pretty much it for assembly. So I think it's time to make tea. So our tea carrier is all finished. I've already went ahead and put it in my spoon and my tea bag. And now it's time to make tea and see how this works. I'm gonna slide my cup back in there, close it up. Oh, I can feel the heat staying in there now. And I think I'm gonna kick back, start nibbling on my tea cookies, and read my book. Hope you've enjoyed us showing you how to make this wonderful gift for yourself or for others. And until next time, stay cozy and warm and enjoy some tea and biscuits.